What is real? What do we actually know that is real? This is going to be pretty controversial, not going to lie, but it's in the Bible. This is a huge deal. This potential correction completely changes the game. If we can't confirm that the pillar is real, and we can't confirm that Cretaeus, the younger, actually talked to these people at these parties and whatnot, if we can't confirm that any of this actually happened, then what is real? What do we actually know that is real? Well, we know that Solon was a real person, and he actually did go to Egypt. We know that the Temple of Neith was a real place, that Amasis was a real guy who really liked the Greeks, and we know that Cretaeus, the younger, the one who tells the Atlantis report, he actually is a real guy, we're pretty sure. He actually later in history becomes Cretaeus the tyrant and terrorizes Athens. So that's interesting. But really everything else is subject to just be a complete fabrication. And so, I mean, that's why the prevailing theory is the invention theory. And so, I mean, well, is that it? One of the biggest criticisms with the Atlantis report, as we have kind of shown, is that it's essentially an ancient game of telephone from over like 210 years. Goes from the priests in Neith, down to Solon, blah, 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 down to Cretaeus, the elder, right? And so it's like, can we really trust all of the people down the line that the details never got, mistranslated or confused or lost or changed or embellished? Maybe so. It depends on how much you trust those individual people. Like Solon, I would say, yeah, you could probably trust him. Plato, maybe, depending on who you are. It just depends. There's an old Muslim scholar named Ibn Khaldun. He's known as the father of sociology. So he was in around like 14th century AD. And he wrote this book called the Muqaddimah. And in this, chapter 2, I believe it is, he talks about the difference between sedentary peoples and nomadic peoples. And he, talks about one of the differences is that nomadic peoples have oral tradition, right? They recount their history through word of mouth, essentially. And they have these priests who are supposed to remember everything. Whereas with sedentary peoples, you actually have written records, and tries to talk about which one of these is better. In traditional Muslim idea, both are just as good, depending on what your source is. Ibn Khaldun says, well, you should have a combination of both, more or less. That you can't just trust that, oh, I trust the guy, so, yeah, of course it's true. You should try to back it up with historical records or archaeology. And so that's exactly what I'm going to try to do right now. It is important to just know and to acknowledge that it's really easy and common with Atlantis to cherry pick details that fit your theory. A great example I can think of here is with the Minoan, ancient Minoan theory. It says, because there's a lot of like evidences and details that kind of point towards the ancient Minoans. The biggest problem is that the story explicitly says that Atlantis was not in the Mediterranean. And so it's like, if you want to claim that it's the Minoan civilization, you either have to just ignore that detail entirely or come up with some convoluted way of like, well, the context and like maybe the translation thing. And so the reality is that almost no theory fits all of the details given. There's going to be contradictions, and you have to decide whether those contradictions matter or not. If, you have all these proofs and you have a couple of contradictions, does the evidence outweigh the contradictions? You kind of have to decide that for yourself when thinking of what theory that you want to subscribe to. And so with that, let's get ready for some hypocrisy from my side. So I think that there has been some sort of misunderstanding with the Atlantis report, specifically when they say that it was 9,000 years ago. I've already kind of set up earlier in the video why I just don't think that's true. It's just too long. Nothing would exist, right? And let me explain what I think happened. We already talked briefly about this guy named Proclus, that he talked a little bit about like the different back and forth in his day of Atlantis, and that's where we get the pillar and Nath like theory and whatnot. Well, Proclus stated in a different like context a quote or an idea from another mathematician, Greek mathematician named Eudoxus. Eudoxus was a mathematician, studied the Pythagorean philosophy, where you get the Pythagorean theorem. He actually shows up a couple times in this theory. It's kind of weird. But he also studied in Egypt for a time. And according to Proclus, Eudoxus says that the Egyptians, quote unquote, call months a year. That is to say that sometimes they just will say, instead of saying, oh, that was this many years ago, they'll say it's this many months ago. And I think that might be what happened with Atlantis. What's up? Ian from the future. As I was researching for a future video, I found a quote from Diodorus that goes exactly into what I was just talking about in the past. Diodorus was a Greek historian who lived during the Roman Empire around the 1st century AD, and he wrote a book which goes over a lot of the mythologies and trying to contextualize it and make it make sense in a more modern sense, trying to ground the myths in reality. And so he gives some explanations for some of the crazy things like the long dates of Egyptian mythology. And this is an exact quote. The priests of the Egyptians, reckoning the time from the reign of Helios to the crossing of Alexander into Asia, say that it was in round numbers 23,000 years, and as their legends say, the most ancient of the gods ruled more than 1,200 years, and the later ones not less than 300. But since this great number of years surpasses belief, some men would maintain that in early times, before the movement of the sun had as yet been recognized, it was customary to reckon the year by the lunar cycle. Consequently, since the year consisted of 30 days, it was not impossible that some men lived 1,200 years, for in our own time, when our year consists of 12 months, not a few men live over 100 years. This goes exactly into what I was talking about with Eudoxus, that there is somehow this mistranslation between a year and the 12 months, and then confusing 12 months for 12 years, making certain dates or periods of time way longer than they actually are. And so if we apply this logic, the same logic that this renowned historian Diodorus applies to the Egyptian mythology here, including Alexander, then that would mean that the fall of Atlantis happened not 9,000 years ago, but 9,000 months ago. That it wasn't 9,000 years ago, but it was 9,000 months ago. Now, the only complicated thing there is that we don't have any examples in Egyptian records where they swapped it, where they counted time in months instead of years. They did use a lunar cycle, which is 28 days, for ritualistic things and like ceremonies, but not for historical accounts. But to me, at least, how I think of it is that, well, it's, the Egyptians like actually have their way of doing things, but what matters here more is, do the Greeks fully understand that? And did the Greek people, maybe Solon accidentally somehow, maybe when he was translating it from Egyptian to Greek, made that mistake? And then the next guy, maybe originally it did say 9,000 months, and then the next guy was like, who counts in months? This has to be years. And that's just what happened. And there is actually potentially another famous case of this happening. This is going to be pretty controversial, not going to lie, but it's in the Bible. It's in Genesis. Before the flood, you have these super long lifespans for these people. I believe like Adam supposedly lived to be 930 years old. Noah was 950. Methuselah was 1,200 years old. And this has been a source for a lot of concern and debate for some Christian historians and scientists, because it's like, how do you explain this and stay true to your faith and whatnot? Well, they just mixed that up, and instead of being 930 years for Adam's lifespan, it was months. And if we do the math there, the dates, the lifespans would be 77 years for Adam when he died, supposedly, 80 years old for Noah, and 100 years old for Methuselah. I mean, that seems like pretty like normal lifespans. That's totally plausible. And I mean, whether it's true or not, that could potentially give precedent to the same thing happening to Atlantis. Okay, so now let's actually apply this math to Atlantis. So we got 9,000 years, and what we're going to do is multiply it by 28 for 28 days in a lunar cycle. All right, and so this is going to equal 252,000 days. When you divide this by 365, for days in the year, what you get is 690 years. And we can do this again with 9,000 divided by 12. If you think that maybe it's not the lunar cycle, maybe it was actually just straight up months. So we do this again, and that will equal to 750 years. All right, and there is some discrepancy between were they talking about 9,000 years, or you can say months, from Solon or from Plato. And so we'll get this in a range from when Solon learned of the myth. So Solon learned this myth in 570 BC, right? And Crataeus supposedly retold this story in the party around 420 BC. And so all you got to do there is add both of these numbers to both of these numbers, and what you get in the results is you get 1320 BC to the lowest 1170 BC. And then for the later, or I guess the earlier telling of like with Crataeus, it would be 1260 BC to 1110. Okay, so here's our 4 potential dates for when Atlantis sunk, and this gives us a median of 1215 BC with, give or take, 110 years with a range of 210 years. Okay, so this number is where we're going to try to look for in the sinking of Atlantis. And this is a huge deal. This potential correction completely changes the game. Let me explain. Because the 12th to 13th century BC is known as the fall of the Bronze Age. There is so much going on in history, a lot of mystery, okay? That rhymed, okay? There's the exodus of the Hebrews from Egypt, the Battle of Talents in northern Germany, the Battle of Troy from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And there's also the mysterious collapse of most major civilizations and empires around the Mediterranean basin. And this time period is called by historians the fall of the Bronze Age, a time shrouded in mystery and covered in blood. Now, following this, we can try to actually connect real historical events and archaeological sites to Atlantis. That's the end of what I have there. So thank you so much for tuning in and listening to the end here. It really means a lot. I've been working on this project for years. I've been researching Atlantis for probably like 5-6 years now. I have a lot planned, and I might go on to other subjects when I'm done with Atlantis. I don't know, because I feel like I just want to give an actual, like, real due diligence research to other topics, and I'm like hyper focused on Atlantis right now. So maybe in the future, but just not right now. My goal for like what I want to achieve here, though, is to bring Atlantis out of just mythology and make it something that people are actually thinking of and talking about as something that could actually be out there, not just this fairy tale. And I'd love to also just bring up discussion for just archaeology as a whole and just be a hub for chatter on that stuff. I will try to talk about other theories for Atlantis. I do have a main theory that I subscribe to, and that I'll be trying to prove. But I will go over other theories, even the ones I don't really agree with. I can't promise that I'll be totally unbiased with those. But I mean, that's just how it is, right? I took a class, and one of the things that we learned is that you have bias, and it's impossible to be unbiased in a study, basically, when you're talking like anthropologically. And so you just kind of have to accept, embrace, and try to work with and around your bias. And that's just what you got to do. There's a quote I actually really like, which is, "The knowable world is incomplete if seen from any one point of view, incoherent if seen from all points of view at once, and empty if seen from nowhere in particular." It's called The View from Manywheres, and I like it a lot. So I will be posting hopefully all of the sources, citations in the description, so you can read those original manuscripts for yourself and do your own research. Please, like, subscribe, make a comment, share this with people that you think would like it. Really want the channel to grow, because the more that the channel grows and the more resources that I can get, the closer we can get to actually putting these theories to the test and trying to hopefully one day discover Atlantis for real.